So the Life Chances study started in 1990 in two inner city suburbs in Melbourne. It was a population-based study with roughly equal numbers of low, middle and high-income families, and there was an equal number of male and female babies. There was widespread concern at the time about growing inequality and child poverty. There was a desire by the Brotherhood of St Laurence to better understand what shaped the life chances, the opportunities of infants. What's unusual about the study is that it does look not only at low-income families but also at higher income families. One of the key findings, I suppose, of the study is that the circumstances into which you were born don't dictate necessarily your life trajectory and your opportunities. The studies really offered insights into the impacts of advantage and disadvantage, and we've looked at different aspects of this across the 14 stages of the study. Inequality has increased, but it's not a simple picture because there's been positive and negative change. So there've been some really positive progress that have changed over the last 34 years, which have opened up opportunities, but at the same time there've been a tightening of investment in, for example, in public housing. There have been policies that have led to unaffordable housing, that have restricted access to income support. So there are still some persistent issues that remain unaddressed across those 34 years. Thinking about how the study has affected people's understanding of disadvantage and advantage, one person's comment was that, "I think it's really shone a light on the different circumstances and what services are available to different people from different backgrounds, that there is a lot of inequality and prejudice and limited access to services, and there's a stigma and socio-economic factors influence them." And that was in sharp contrast to in earlier parts of the study when the children were much younger. They were asked similar questions about advantage and disadvantage, and some people said, well, there's no poverty in our area, everybody is equal, they're all treated equally. And later on, comments came from people that as the study went on and they became more familiar with the impacts of the study in the lives of people, they realised that some people had lived in a bubble, and with their peers who were all similarly advantaged, they didn't realise and didn't understand that there was also disadvantage. But some of the children who grew up in a disadvantaged family said that they understood that they were poor, but they didn't think that they were necessarily disadvantaged.
We have the exact money we need, and money isn't really important to us. Love is, like our family.
It's absolutely remarkable the commitment that the Brotherhood of St Laurence has made to support such a long-running study. It's one of the longest, if not the longest running qualitative longitudinal study in Australia, and it's a real testament to BSL that the study has been supported. The value of the study and of this kind of research is that it can examine issues of inequality, develop a more detailed and nuanced understanding of advantage and disadvantage to inform advocacy about the policy changes that are required to improve people's life chances for a better and fairer society.
Thanks so much for inviting me today. I want to acknowledge we gather on unceded land and pay respects to elders past and present. Thanks so much to the Brotherhood for asking me to speak at the celebration of this unique research project. What an amazing organisation BSL is. I think if you read the report, if you read the news, if you look out the window, your work is needed now more than ever. It's very on brand for you to have initiated and supported this piece of work. You didn't just want to polish the problem, but you wanted to sponsor research that continued to help you advocate for interventions to improve the lives of Australian children, particularly those that have grown up in the context of poverty, racism and disadvantage. Now, I'm not an expert on Freud, but I don't think he ever came up with an idea of research envy, but I have it. Maybe he did. I haven't read everything he's written. I really want to shout out to the amazing researchers who were involved in this project, to the people that wrote the reports. Congratulations on your hard work, and the participants and their generosity of opening up their lives to be part of this. So really just astounded. I've been asked to reflect a little bit on the insights from this report, which are a lot, and we're going to have an opportunity to delve into them in the panel. But what struck me, a couple of things struck me the most when I think about also the research that I've done over the last 20 years. One of the key findings, that education was valued by everybody but didn't alone guarantee a good job. When I listen to young Australians who have done what our society has told them to do, go to school, work hard, get an education, go to TAFE, go to university, their return on investment of their hard work and intelligence in terms of security and safety is not what it once was. And we can't be the fair country, let alone the clever country, if that continues to be the case. And if we continue, let me just say, to put more public money towards private education than we do to public education. The rise of insecure work at the same time in which there has been a deterioration of the social safety net. And it was particularly poignant reading of the report to see that there were participants who felt that they could go back to university or go back to education in order to escape this cycle of insecure work and not necessarily be rewarded. At the moment, I mean, when I first started my research career 20 years ago, it was writing a book about young Australians. And I interviewed 60 young Australians from all different backgrounds across the country. And they said there were 3 important issues that faced them that they were really worried that would be the barriers to not only them being able to live the life they wanted to live, but to grow up in the kind of society that they wanted to grow up in. And that was climate change, housing and mental health. We've done very well on those 3 issues in the last 20 years. In fact, I say that as a joke, but it is disheartening to be in a focus group or to be interviewing somebody who's in a full-time job, whose partner is in a full-time job, and they say, well, we're living with my family, so one day we hope to be able to rent. So those are people who are in full-time employment, who've had education, who have won the parent lottery to have their parents say, yes, you can stay with us. If people like that are feeling like they can't make a place in our society, then imagine for other people where that's not the case. There are good news, as Dina said, there is good news in this report as well. And obviously we've seen significant changes for so many Australian women in terms of entering the workforce. But we've still seen in many cases the gender division of labour reinforced, and that's particularly the case when there's a gender pay gap and where there are issues to access of cost to childcare, and that often means that women are doing the full-time care and the part-time work, often to their long-term economic detriment. I want to just finally, because we've got a lot of opportunity to explore some of these issues in the panel, reflect on what this amazing piece of research tells us about inequality. It is very effective at outlining the effects of different governments' policies and how they have increased the polarisation in our community. Inequality has increased since the 1990s, and we've been seeing these widening gaps between socioeconomic groups. That economic polarisation has over the last 10 years been increased by social and cultural polarisation, reinforced by how polarised our media environment is. Social isolation is getting worse. We saw how endemic it is during COVID, but the kinds of things that have been causing that social isolation exist now that lockdowns are in the rearview mirror. And all of this makes me wonder, what are the opportunities that we have today for social mobility? And thinking a bit about the study, and I'm a qualitative researcher as much as I deal with numbers, I think there's nothing like hearing the stories of people to really bring to life some of the numbers, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. And I was reflecting a bit about over the period of time of the Life Chances report, which is, a good chunk of my life, and what's happened to me and what's happened to my family story. So my grandmother came here from Italy before the Second World War at 9. She went from an educational environment which wasn't great, but at least was an Italian, to the cane farms of northern Queensland where she didn't get an education. Her daughter was the first person in her entire family to get a university degree, and her granddaughters both have PhDs. So that is an extraordinary story of social mobility. But I wonder, in fact, I probably am very cynical, that if somebody like my grandmother arrived on Australian shores today, 9, poor, not having the opportunity of education, would that social mobility story happen for her? And if you add to that the racism that she exhibited, which we still have in our society directed towards migrant communities. So it made me a little bit sad to think, this extraordinary story of 3 generations of women in my family we might not be creating the kind of Australia that would allow that to happen today. The numbers show some of the numbers that exist in some of the longitudinal quantitative data reinforce what this report has found. The Scale on Social Cohesion report shows the biggest drop in social cohesion last year since the study was commenced in 2007, and a significant decline, and this is in terms of public perception, that Australia is the land of economic opportunity. That's declined 16 percentage points since 2013. It's really a substantial decline. And in research that we've just released last week on Australian home ownership and accommodation security, only 17% of people disagreed with this statement. The Australian dream of home ownership is pretty much dead for younger generations. So what is the promise of Australia if home ownership is dead, if social mobility is less than it was decades before? This is what we all need to be vigilant about, and this is what we all need to fight for. The insights from this extraordinary piece of research should continue to be used by advocates and continue to be read by decision makers, because we do not want to give up on the hope that Australia can be a safe, fair society, full of opportunity and largely free of discrimination. Thank you.
So I'm Dina Bowman, Principal Research Fellow in the Work and Economic Security in the Social Policy and Research Centre at the Brotherhood of St Laurence. I've been involved with the Life Chances study for, I think, about as long as I've been at the Brotherhood, which is about 15 years. First, I was a member of the advisory group with people like, some of whom are here, Joe Baevsky, Kelly Hand, Professor Dan Woodman, Lucy Nelms, I saw Lucy here somewhere, and others, and then working alongside absolutely fantastic researchers like Janet Taylor, Joseph Borlagden, I think Joseph is here, Melita Allen, I can see you at the back, Eris Levin, Matt Curry, and most recently for the past 5 years, Ursula Harrison. And it's been an enormous privilege to be part of the study. In preparing the final report, we reviewed some of the 23 reports, 10 journal articles, and revisited the data, read Janet's book closely, looked at the videos, and what really struck me was the rigour of the research, and I'm not just talking about the ones I've been involved with, but going back at particularly those early ones, really fiercely strong research, policy relevant research, which it really kind of struck me. The other thing that struck me was the generosity of the participants. Absolutely astounding. The really personal insights about their experience, which were so generously shared, and it's astounding, really, to have a look across 34 years that you've got insight into people's lives. Of course, because we only check in from time to time, we don't know everything, but we certainly understand the contours of people's lives, which is an extraordinary privilege. And the final thing that really struck me was BSL's organisational commitment to the study. And I'd call out the support of the directors of the Research and Policy Centre, as was, now Social Policy and Research Centre, including Professor Jan Carter, Alison McClelland, Professor Paul Smythe, Professor Shelley Mallett, and most recently Dr Nicole Besky. And what's striking is, in looking at all across those 34 years of research insights, is the kind of consistency, the continuity of the issues, the same things coming up, yes, at different life phases, and yes, recognising changes in policies, but there was this kind of persistence of the issues. The last 34 years, as Rebecca says, has seen increased financialisation and marketisation, and that has increased risks for individuals. And at the same time, increasingly targeted social support has created the need to rely on the family safety net. And that's great if you've got one, but it's very difficult if you haven't. It's inherently unfair because, of course, not all families have resources or the capacity to provide a buffer against increased risks. And so, as I've said, I keep on saying it, I'm going to keep on saying it, over the past 34 years, the study has highlighted the importance of social policies and programs in creating opportunities. And what really is needed is the political will to refocus on investment in social and economic policy to enable economic security and social inclusion. So that's enough from me. We're really lucky to have a fantastic panel to talk about some of the issues raised in the Life Chances study. Before I introduce the panel and somehow get into that chair, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respect to elders past and present. And it's important to also extend respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. On my way here, I listened to Larissa Behrendt in conversation with Gary Foley. It's on the Speaking Out program on ABC Radio National. Fantastic conversations with activists. I suppose you could use the word elder activists. And what really highlighted to me was the importance of looking back and understanding history because it can help us imagine a better future. We've got a fantastic group of people to speak with us. Rebecca Huntley, who has been introduced, who will be able to contribute to our conversation. Then we have Isabel Walker, one of our Life Chances participants, who's been so generous in supporting the study. And we have Vin Tran, who's also a participant in the study, and again, we'll be able to shed light on not only the experience of advantage or disadvantage, but also of being in the study for 34 years. And finally, we have Professor Roger Wilkins, who is the co-director of the Hilda study, Household Income and Labour Dynamics in Australia study, which is a major longitudinal study, which I think covers around 17,000 people, so much bigger than Life Chances, but certainly will shed light around patterns of inequality. I was going to read out people's bios, but I haven't. But So I think that'll come out. Where are we? Questions. So I thought I'd structure the conversation by first focusing on the patterns and causes of inequality, then turn to the experience and impacts of inequality, and then finally talk about what we can do about it to make a real impact on poverty and inequality in Australia. So first, patterns and causes of inequality. I thought I'd turn to you, Roger. The Life Chances study focused on the experience of inequality in Australia. It's a small study, as I said, compared to the Hilda study with around 17,000 people. So could you reflect on the shifts and persistence of inequality in Australia over the last few decades and the extent to which the findings of the Life Chances study resonate with your own research?
So thanks, Dina. So you've given me just a rather small question there to take on. But so the Hilda survey, we actually started 11 years after the Life Chances study. So it started in 2001. But it's not a birth cohort study. So we do have plenty of people born in 1990 in the study. We just didn't get data on them for the first 11 years of their life. I think I really was struck by how the themes and what I call the empirical regularities that we see in Hilda were borne out in this study. It really did resonate with me, and it was really great to get, I guess, more flesh on the bone in terms of what that meant in terms of how people's lives were playing out and the mechanisms by which policies and circumstances impact on outcomes and the life choices and outcomes that people have. So I think it very much did resonate. In terms of that broader question about inequality in Australia, it's complicated, right? Inequality, we tend to throw the term around rather loosely and we just talk about whether it's going up or down, but it's actually inherently a very multi-dimensional concept. There's all sorts of dimensions along which you can look at inequality. Obviously, we can look at just the overall distribution of income, but there are other things that contribute to our economic well-being that aren't distributed equally. And then we can think about inequality along gender lines or along ethnicity lines or even generational lines. So when you're trying to think about what's happened over the last 34 years, what you conclude depends a lot on what you choose to focus on. And I think, as Dina said, it hasn't been an unambiguously bad story the last 34 years for Australia. I think there's been positive developments and there are negative developments, and there are things I think that we, looking forward, have reason for anxiety about as well. So in terms of the conventional measures of inequality, things like income inequality, we actually saw the 80s and 90s was when we really had the big increase in income inequality in Australia. And since the late 90s, early 2000s, it's the overall measure of inequality has bounced around a bit, but it broadly hasn't shifted that much. So there's sort of you can interpret that in a glass half full or glass half empty way, in the sense that we had this substantial shift up in inequality and now it's become entrenched. On the other hand, at least it hasn't perhaps exacerbated further. We know less about the distribution of wealth, so this is what people own. We really only started getting good data on that at the beginning of this century. That does seem to be, we are seeing growth in inequality on wealth, which is certainly a cause for concern, and that's very much connected to what's going on in the housing market, and I'll return to that in a moment. In terms of and as you mentioned, Dina, we've seen some progress on gender equality, a long way to go there, but it's definitely there's been improvements there. Access to education, there's lots of issues with our education system, but it certainly is true that that young people are more educated than ever before, and again, there's issues in that with that trend that are not so positive. So there's definitely been some positives in terms of intergenerational mobility or the social mobility that Rebecca was talking about. The problem we have here is that the evidence we have, for example, from Hilda, we're always looking through the rear vision mirror. You can't, Rebecca can't tell the story of her. Her, I don't know if you have children or not, Rebecca, but your children, your granddaughters, because that hasn't happened yet, and so you're always telling a story about the past with social mobility, and what we're worried about is not what happened in the past, but what's going to happen in the future. So, in broad terms, social mobility in Australia has historically been, pretty good, certainly better than, say, for example, the United States, which, has always sort of thought of itself as the land of opportunity, but there are concerns, looking forward that won't persist. And even having said that, and I'm sorry, Dina, I'm going on way too long, but Hilda shows that if you grow up in a household in poverty in childhood, you're about 5 times more likely to be in poverty yourself as an adult than someone who did not grow up in a poor household. So there's still significant issues of persistence of disadvantage in the Australian community, and as has been alluded to by and mentioned by Rebecca, there's really concerns going forward that the past is not a great predictor of the future in this space, and this is where I think you bring in the real, I think, inequality that has really opened up, and that's along generational lines. So we're seeing younger people today are less wealthy than their parents, and their parents were, or at least their parents were at the same age. They're taking longer to get onto the career jobs ladder. They're more educated than ever before, and yet they're not. It's taking longer to get into good career track employment, notwithstanding the current booming labour market for the last couple of years. The housing market has been, we've just made a complete mess of that as a country. It's a national disgrace, and this is a real indictment on policy in Australia that just didn't need to happen. So I think that generational divide is, in a sense, a canary in the coal mine kind of thing about future likely declines in social mobility. But I'll stop there because otherwise I'll eat up all of our time. So.
No, thanks, Roger. Fantastically comprehensive answer, and really highlighting the complexity when we talk about inequality, which is important to and that's what's so difficult, I suppose, with life chances, when it focuses on inequality, but obviously on different forms of inequality along the way. But I might turn to Rebecca and...
just wanted to add something to...
Yeah.
You don't have to ask me a question because I've already talked a
Good.
bit. But, and remember, unlike the Hilda survey, which is such a fantastic piece of work, it actually looks at it looks at the reality. I deal a lot with the perception, but the perception amongst younger Australians is that their social mobility in the future is going to be harder because of housing, and because they can't imagine that there is going to be anything that's going to break that nexus, because so many things in the past haven't. But the other thing that they talk about in terms of making their lives harder in the future compared to previous generations is climate change. And so the combination of the not being able to see what the circuit breaker is for housing and the impost of climate change on every institution and on constraining their own lives are the two things that they really think about as making things much, much harder for them.
Thanks, Rebecca. We're lucky enough to have 2 young people. Well, 34 in my mind is young, so it's who can perhaps shed some light on their experience of some of the issues that have been raised, and I might ask maybe Maybe I'll ask Isabel, just particularly the comments around the sense of generational unfairness around housing, education not necessarily leading to solid employment. Could you reflect on those issues and how perhaps they've impacted your life chances?
Sure. Hi. So, yeah, I think in terms of education, I come from a family of very educated people. My grandparents met at university. My mum has studied at university and her brother and sister did too. I recently have gotten, over COVID actually, a master's in art conservation, and I work as a barista. So I guess, I mean, it's that sort of, very much what we've been talking about, education. I mean, it depends on the education you choose, obviously. I've chosen education that doesn't necessarily lead to a job, and there are pathways that would lead to sort of safer employment. I haven't needed necessarily to choose that, and that's very much because of my family and their support and how I've been able to live my life. But at the same time, it's definitely hitting home for me at the moment, just, you know, what my choices have been and how difficult it is, even with a lot of education, really, to find the work that you want to be doing. And I know that I'm okay because of my family. I've been living at home off and on over the years. I do go overseas a lot, which, you know, that's been my choice again, and I've been able to do that because of my family, but not, I know that, like, if I didn't have that support when I came home, if I didn't have somewhere with a roof over my head, my life would have been very different. And I don't know how it would have been different, but I can see it in sort of the participants that I've, you know, the stories I've seen of theirs, but also just in my family too. I've got brothers and sisters from my dad and my mum who have grown up in dual parent families, and how they're living their lives and how their lives are turning out is very different to how my life is at the moment.
Thanks, Isabel. Vin, you were, like Isabel, born in 1990 and been part of the study across the past 34 years. In the bio that you sent through, you described yourself as being categorised as disadvantaged, and that I wonder if you could reflect on some of your experience and the extent to which education has helped you in terms of social mobility.
So when I classify myself as disadvantaged, I come from a family that immigrated to Australia. I think the first to get a university degree would be my dad. Pretty much my mum was non-English speaking, so she has not gone down to further education. In terms of the disadvantages, I'd probably have to bring back to an early childhood memory. I woke up in the middle of the night, and pretty much across the bed from my own was an empty bed. And so I stood up, walked out, and heard the sewing machine going off. And I think late at night, there was my mum sewing clothes from a sweatshop factory. And sorry, back then, each article of clothing that you finished was, I think, a couple of cents. It wasn't really enough to break that economic barrier to be able to get out and all that. I think that was the major driving force for myself to, I think, get her out of there, help her. In terms of the education, I think it's more towards my dad, who encouraged me to, I guess, finish my high school, try to get into a university. Unfortunately for me, I had to deal with a lot of my own stresses, so I could not get the marks that I needed to be able to get into uni right after high school. So I took the long route, which is through TAFE, Tertiary Enablement Program. So I've got certificates, diplomas, but on the bright side, 2-3 years ago, I graduated, got my bachelor's. However, with the certificate, oddly enough, I'm that person that HR loves that has 7 to 8 years of experience and a fresh degree. So, yeah, I'm that person. So I'd been working within the IT industry. I started off in service desk, customer service, and then made my way up. And I think it's, like education does have its points, but I can definitely see in my generation and the next generation, education just doesn't get that response, that investment that you're meant to be getting back.
So what do you think, Vin, might help then to make a difference for people like you and perhaps in the future others who are trying to build a better life?
I wish I can honestly answer that. I could probably try to run for government, but in all honesty, it's what really motivates you. So again, mine was my mother, my parents, and you just got to find that motivation point. Like you have to learn to dig up. Is what you're being taught. Yeah.
The motivation that's a fantastic strength, but did anything in particular help you in terms of you said you went to TAFE, so you had the opportunity of going that longer path, a different route into university education.
Yeah.
What else might have helped?
I think I was also fortunate to meet a couple of different people in my life that helped to, I guess, mentor me towards certain studies, educating me, where pretty much whenever I tripped, they'd help me get up. Like, I was very fortunate in that sense. But TAFE is really quite good. We're quite fortunate in this country to have, it used to be known as HEX, now it's known as HELP, I believe. And that really does help. But at the end of the day, you have to choose and sacrifice into a career or course that will likely get you a job than something that you want to enjoy and pursue.
And that can be really hard, can't it, to know what might lead to employment. I know other people in the study talked about doing circles in courses, trying to think what might lead to more secure employment. So it can be very difficult to actually find that. And I think both what Isabel and Vin, you both talked to that extended transition. We talk about the transition from school to work. And often it's like 10-year plus before you can actually get secure employment, regardless of your qualifications. So, and that certainly came out in the research across the years, the importance of education, but it's not a guarantee of economic security, as perhaps it might have been in the past. So we talked about housing, we talked about education. Just, I suppose, a question to all of the panellists. What do you think is the most important, if there is one thing, is there one thing, or what are the suite of policies that perhaps should be invested in to try to even up the odds? Roger?
Should we start with?
Go, Roger.
Sure. I mean, look, now you're at risk of me going for hours. But I think if I had to sort of nominate, one thing that I think, I would direct attention to would be just to bolster our income support system. I think that there have been some positive developments in the last sort of 2 years, really sort of post-COVID, in terms of boosting job seeker, Commonwealth rent assistance, raising the maximum age for eligibility for of the youngest child for eligibility for parenting payment single. They've been good developments, and they really reverse what I saw as probably a 30-year project of chipping away at our system of social protection, and just really, I'd say probably from the mid-90s onwards, it was maybe even the early 90s, it was being chipped away at, and I think that was a trend that hopefully is finished now, and we're going to think more about our income support system as an investment in people and their capabilities, and giving them, creating more resilience. If the safety net, which it often is for many people, works as a safety net, then you longer term, everyone is better off in the community, not just those who need the safety net. It's not just a safety net, it is also an important source of protection for people who, for example, people with disability or very heavy caring responsibilities, they should be able to lean on it. So I think reinvesting in the income support system would be my number one, not my only target, but I think that would be where I would be advocating for.
Thanks, Roger. Totally agree. What do you think, Rebecca?
Oh, I'd have to say housing. I just never ever do a piece of research where it doesn't come back to that. And the extent to which we can, as individuals, can make a change here, it's very limited. Probably the only, I think, lever we can push is come to terms with the fact that we just have to live in smaller houses, and we just have to accept that we're going to be living in smaller houses. There are environmental reasons for that. I spent plenty of the last 20 years visiting one or two people still living in the family home with, 7 or 8 bedrooms or whatever, or 5 or 6 bedrooms, so we've got to change that. But other than that, it really, and this is where political will is important, we need a concerted effort at all levels of government to unravel the tax and other laws around the way that housing is. So if you are generationally lucky to have got into the housing market and bought more property, then you're okay. You might pass that on to the next generation or the generation after. Might is the big word there. But the barrier for entry, not just in terms of buying houses, but having any secure housing at all as a renter, is just getting worse and worse and worse. And if you go back to a hierarchy of needs, knowing that the roof over your head is secure and that you can be part of the community and you can put your name down in the local childcare centre because you're going to stay there, it is fundamental. It's not so much a crisis now as it's existential for everybody. So, but this takes enormous political will to do something about this, because we have got to a point where we think that doing anything around housing is punishing people, mum and dad investors who just want to get ahead. But that is a complete distortion of what's happening. A complete distortion. So for me, and not just for me, but for every single person I've interviewed in the last 20 years and even more in the last 5 years, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, housing, income support. What do you think, Isabel?
I definitely agree with both of those things. For one, housing is a big thing for me. But also, I guess, reflecting back on my time, income support too. I remember when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I didn't earn enough to be considered financially independent to get government support. So even though I was living out of home and supporting myself while studying, I wasn't financially independent from my parents. So, there's definitely those sorts of rules that I know that they're changing, but for me, that was something that sticks in my mind, and I'm still kind of bitter about it. And I also think, as Vin was saying, the pathways. I've come to find what I wanted to do really quite late in life, and I'm entering into my profession much older than quite a few of the other people coming into the profession, because I sort of didn't know it existed. And I think that conversation that you have in high school and as you're going through life needs to have a bit better support, so that you know what's out there and what your options are. I think I was very much, you're academically bright, go to uni. And I went to uni, and came out and had no idea what I was doing. And then sort of, bounced around for a while. And had I taken the time and had they sort of gone, do this, do that, try this, try these things, work for a bit, see how you feel, I might have been in a different position than I am in now.
Thanks, Isabel. So I'll turn to you, Vin. What are your thoughts?
I agree with everyone's points so far. If I disagree, I'm going to have problems. But look, I agree that there should be further assistance for low income or those suffering from those disadvantages. However, I believe there should be an additional, policy to encourage people to not be reliant on those assistance. Initially, those government assistance are meant to be as a temporary assistance whilst you're able to find further education, find additional employment. However, what I think the stigma behind that is once you're in it for life kind of thing. And that's something that I've seen a lot within the more disadvantaged groups. People will just basically stay in it. What is the point? You're pretty much almost getting meeting that amount that the average, people within my generation are earning now, because it's just wage and all that aren't keeping up. Inflation's causing that little bit of advantage that the middle income earned to now be pushed back into the low income. One other thing I would also, add would be regarding housing. When I was growing up, public housing, such as the one we've got just over there, Fitzroy, the way it was designed was, a sense of community. I remember a lot of the community events, they encouraged the kids that lived within those flats to come down, interact. I've seen a huge decrease in a lot of that. What I've now started seeing, and this is, a pain point, is I went down to Richmond where my grandparents used to live, and I think it's almost looking like it's starting to become more of a slum. The houses are closer together. You can see, used syringes pretty much everywhere. And the reason why these were designed that way was to discourage that whole ideology of let's become a slum. Let's give them somewhere to live, give them somewhere to call a home, but also encourage them to break out, move out, be able to grow, that kind of thing. And I think that's what we really need in terms of the policies.
Thanks, Vin. Great points, great discussion. I might open it up for questions. You have the opportunity to pick up on things that I've missed and ask questions. Who would like to do that? There is a roving mic, I believe. Chris has a yes. Yes, there's one there, I think, Jenny.
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Davidson. I'm CEO of the Council of Single Mothers and Their Children, which is the poorest family structure in Australia, single mother-headed households particularly. And for a 55-year-old organisation, we find it surprising that there is still stigma attached to these families, and it's largely around this, sort of government concern about welfare dependence and intergenerational welfare, or lifelong and intergenerational welfare dependence. It really links into what you just said, Vin. Thank you all. Fantastic to have you here. I'm interested to hear from you. I am not a researcher, so I say these off-the-cuff things. So I'd really love to hear what you all think about. One of the things I say is that it's not the number or gender of your parents that does any harm. It is the poverty, and that children are often in poverty because social security payments are below the poverty line. But also, of course, there's the challenge of people who are earning a living and are still, in financial hardship or poverty. So I just wonder if anyone wanted to reflect on that, the number and gender of parents and the impact it has on families.
Putting on my hard-headed economist hat, I would say that the number probably does matter, because it's you're missing a resource in the household. Confession, I'm a half-time single parent, and for the half when I have the kids, it's you're struggling. You just don't have enough time, not enough hours in a day to do everything. And so I think that's got to have consequences for a given amount of income. Just your ability to deliver on the parenting is compromised. So I certainly would say that the more we can get both parents, there's usually still two parents involved with single parent families, the more we can get them both shouldering some of the parenting burden. I think that is still a worthwhile policy objective. Obviously there are other issues that we have to consider that would trump that often, but yeah, certainly not. I couldn't imagine the gender of its on its own being relevant. But yeah, what it does actually suggest is that a single parent actually needs more resources than a couple to achieve a certain given standard of living standard for their family.
I would just say I would agree with what you said, as both an aspiration, or kind of in a hopeful way. I would say that if I look back on the social research I've done with single parents, if they have family support, or if they have a partner who is equally, and a kind of a harmonious and equal parent involvement, whatever, or equitable parent involvement, then I don't think it's a problem. It's when one parent is left isolated without that support that's a real problem. And that's when, for a whole range of reasons, government and community need to step in to support. It's when that person is left isolated that's a real problem. And that is something that the government could do, but also, let's face it, hashtag not all men, but it is often men that aren't as, they might be financially involved, but they're not actually as involved. So that's why we need to do the very kind of hard work of refashioning gender roles. And that's been the other dramatic thing of the last 30 years. We've seen women become more and more educated, more and more involved in the labour market, but we haven't seen a similar change in men's behaviour in the labour market or men's behaviour in the home. It's just not been, what's happened, what that has meant is that women with high levels of economic capital have been able to pay to outsource the kinds of things that they've struggled to get their partner to do in the home. That's a whole other thing. But yes, I think you're right, and I think that I think the stigma around single parenting has not. We would hope that it's gone, but it hasn't.
I'm just going to touch on that quickly. I didn't feel stigma per se, but I remember in primary school there was one other boy in my class, and we were both single parent families, and it was like this little understanding that we had, that we were different from everyone else, and that our family situation was not what everyone else sort of knew. But also I'd like to say that, yeah, you're very much right. My mum relied on family and friends and had a really great network, and my dad was very supportive too. And so in that sense, I think I was very lucky. I was the good single parent family outcome. But I've definitely noticed that, that's not always the case.
So one of the things that came out in the research is for immigrant families, they may have connections, but not necessarily to mainstream employment or mainstream education, and so it can be harder to make their way. Would you like to reflect on that, Vin?
Sure. Okay. There was a quote once made by quite a smart man. Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. For immigrants especially, you're coming to a new country, very limited or no English skills at all. With that, the sense of community is greatly increased. You will notice it in areas such as, I guess, Sunshine or St. Albans. There is a huge community of Vietnamese. The issue behind that is it's pretty much the blind leading the blind, and they're hoping that their offspring will eventually be the ones to break that cycle. Unfortunately with that, we also end up inheriting what we like to call the generational curse, which is a lot of the stigma of, okay, now I have to take care of my family's family. And by then it's like, okay, I have nothing to get my own out now, so you pretty much end up moving back and living in that little community again. And I guess that's that's my response to your question. It's, yeah, you just don't know what you can do anymore.
Thanks, Ben. I think we've got time for one more question, and then we will... how do I decide? Maybe Ruby?
Thanks. It's been really, really wonderful to hear from all of you and also to meet the other participants. It's been like a very interesting kind of reunion. But I wanted to reflect a bit on and ask for your thoughts on overcoming social narrative versus reality. I feel like the generational social narratives are so separate and there does seem to be at times there was that ad for the lamb ad that came out this year would talk about that, the sense of like the generational wars are getting quite serious, but there is that, when it comes to housing particularly, the realities that we live with now are so removed from what has happened before that there's almost an unwillingness to accept that is what our situation is, in part because I suppose there could also be a sense of, is it our responsibility or is it our fault? And so I guess I'm curious how that has shown up in your lives and also in the work that's happening, and how we can break past the narratives that make it very hard to face the realities that we're dealing with.
It's a great question, and I like that idea of that tension between is it our responsibility and is it our fault, which is often the common thing that the baby boomer generation talk about, right? So I think where the narrative and the reality in my research is the gap is that the vast majority of older Australians feel really bad about what's happened to their kids and grandkids. They're not like, well, sucked in for not helping with the laundry when you're a kid. You know what I mean? Like, it's like there's no kind of meanness about it. There is a set of very difficult challenges facing them about what they do with their retirement, with the money that they're spending, because in some cases their parents are still alive. Like it's not like there are easy practical or economic choices for that generation to make. So there is a lot of goodwill, and where there can be a lot of generational support where that's available. But I think that increasingly the policy landscape is making that harder and harder. So when I started, my first book was on generations, and in the early work that I did, I said what I see more in the work that I do, particularly in ethnic communities, is intergenerational support, and that there's a bit of a double-edged sword there, which is my ethnic community supports me, but also I want to escape them if I can, because there is also support, but there's also like telling me what to do all the time. So the goal and the desire is intergenerational support, but the intractable policy problems are making that harder and harder. And that's what we have to address. And we also have to acknowledge that for every family that is intact and supportive, there is however many other families that are dispersed, where there is unaddressed childhood trauma, where there is addiction, where there is a whole range of other things stopping that even being a question.
I would probably have a less generous view of older generations. What they want, because I think the policy has followed the votes, and so they might feel bad, but not sufficiently bad to actually vote for things that would rectify the situation. And on the broader point about narratives are almost always tend to be self-serving. You know, that we tend to tell ourselves stories that, you know, are in our, you know, work for our interests. And so I think this is where it's the importance of projects like Hilda, which actually try to interrupt narratives with actual data, actual evidence. Say, well, this is the reality. and it's incumbent on us as, essentially as academics, as policy, as advocates to be showing up where narratives are false and are not serving the broader community's interests.
I think we actually have time for 2 more questions. So there were, I think Jan, is it? Yes.
I'm Jane Carter, and I do want to make it clear that we didn't one day press a button and out came the Life Chances study in 1990. It was a very messy and difficult political and technical process to set up, because it was a big departure for the Brotherhood to invest in this type of research. So that's a story all of its own, but given that it was so hard to set up, but given that it's been such a success in the way it's lasted, my question is, why are you closing it, given what we've been talking about this morning? Seems to me the need is even greater, because I'm totally horrified at the social policy of today as somebody who was actively involved 30 years ago. I'm just talking about sole parents. I remember at the Brotherhood, we ran a little campaign when the government announced that it was going to cut back sole parent capacity from 24 if you had a student at university to 18. We thought that was outrageous. And look what's happened since. So my question is, why close down the Life Chances project?
Well, I'd have to say it wasn't a simple or easy decision. It took a lot of discussion, a lot of consideration. Few things. The sample has become skewed. So we started out pretty evenly, male, female, about a third, lower, medium, and a higher income. Now, through the nature of people dropping out and also through social mobility, we've got a sample which is skewed towards women and better off people. So we weren't getting, I suppose, the insights that we were from the beginning of the study, and we'd have to have done some, and I know other studies have, like the Timescape study where you can recruit another sample to refresh the sample, and we thought about doing that. So there's concerns about the nature of the sample, concerns around funding. Funding is always an issue. It sounds like a lovely story of 34 years, as if it was planned to go on for 34 years with the funding at the beginning, but as you know, it's been patchy. And I mean, we acknowledge the tremendous support, particularly of Bakara Foundation, the Meyer family, but it has been patchy support across the years. And I suppose the final thing, and we've followed people from birth pretty much through to having families of their own, and it comes a time when you think, well, yes, it would be fascinating to keep on following them, find out what happens. But as I said, the sample doesn't really support the research questions that we'd be wanting to ask. So I think the exciting opportunity, and I'll hand this to Trav, is what next? What other kind of study can we do to support the work? But I think in terms of Life Chances, it had run its course over that 34 years.
Hi, I'm Steph. I'm from the Victorian Skills Authority. I wanted to ask you about something that's been playing on my mind for a while. Is this disconnect between massive skill shortages in everything, and yet young people being able to get into quality, secure jobs. And there's this push, a really strong push from both state and federal governments to get more people into TAFE and to university, to get them as educated as we can, ideally with courses that align not only to their personal interests, but also to skill shortages. And yet, how is it that we're not seeing this dividend for studying and completing your education in terms of sustainable, quality, stable employment? And what can we do about that? Big one, I know.
The big one. Roger?
it might be the quality of advice being given to students that's maybe lacking, because obviously it's field of study here that matters enormously. It's not like a generic skills problem, is it? It's skills in particular areas, and one does wonder why students are making the choices they are making. What information do they have available to them that's informing that choice, other than, well, I'm getting the general message that education is good. I'm not being told much beyond that, so I may as well do something that really excites me. And maybe there's not enough consideration there of, the fact that there is heterogeneity there in employment opportunities depending on what you study. That's one guess.
I guess for me, there's also very much been flexibility in work. That's been a focus for me, and so I've taken work that is potentially more flexible, and I've tried a variety of things, and often I've realised that they weren't for me. And again, I think it's that earlier advice and really those better conversations when you're younger and as you go through. Like, I remember you used to be able to make an appointment to talk to a skills advisor while you were at uni. These days, you just talk to some generic person and they haven't got any background in what you're doing. But again, it wasn't made clear. I only went to a skills advisor when I was graduated. And then they were like, well, maybe you could do this or this or this. So I think having those discussions earlier on, perhaps, but also knowing that a lot of the time you work in the jobs that you can get as fast as you can get them, and the ones that will pay you the most. And so I've taken a pay cut recently to do the job that I'm doing for my career. I could make more money working in a cafe, and it doesn't take any skills, really, except experience. And that's sort of the reality of the situation right now, is that, you can make more money without an education half the time, and to develop your career, you're going to have to put in a lot of unpaid hours, and you have to have the ability to be able to do that.
I think we're getting the wind up, so I know there are more questions, but perhaps we can ask the panellists in the discussion. So I might hand over to Nicole.
From a BSL perspective, this research has been incredibly valuable, and we've just had the chance to hear from the panel, and hopefully you've had the chance to look at the report, or you will, to see how important it is, to see exactly what it illuminates for all of us, and the messages that it gives us and our decision makers about the importance of social policy and the impact that really has on people's lives. So from a BSL perspective, the investment that we've put into this research has been central to the way that we've worked, and we're really pleased that we've been able to do that. We're looking really actively for opportunities for new longitudinal research. So talking to the federal department, working a bit with the University of Melbourne in some of those discussions, and as Dina's explained, for a variety of reasons have drawn a line on this work, but we're really committed to finding opportunities for this in the future. So if there are ideas and opportunities that you have as well, please do feel open to come and talk to us about some of those. I think we've really emphasised through that panel discussion that how we think and talk about inequality really does matter. It matters that we understand it's not just about income. It actually is about a number of different issues that have emerged through the lives that we've heard about through this report. We've heard about the need for political will, for investment in social and economic policy that really addresses inequality and disadvantage. I know throughout the course of this 34-year project, participants talked about luck a lot, and we simply cannot leave people's lives to luck. So we really do need that investment and focus from government in people and capabilities, to pick up on the words that Roger used. We've also really, through this work, emphasised and been able to really understand the importance of capturing and sharing the impact of government policies on people. Because it's easy in some ways to talk about numbers from a distance, but when you have the stories of people, that really brings the impact of these policies to life. So we know in Australia we have a persistence of disadvantage and we have poverty. We don't often talk about these things. We don't often talk about social mobility. We've just heard about the relevance of education, the shift in outcomes for people. We no longer have the certainty that you're meant to be getting back. We have an extended transition. These are things that decision makers, policy makers, government and others need to hear. And we're really, really glad that we've had the opportunity to do this work. Which brings me, of course, directly to the people that this work is about. And I really, really want to thank the participants in this project. It wouldn't have existed were it not for the participants and the generosity of the parents of the 167 babies, and now the babies who are now adults, not babies anymore, who have been part of this project over such a long time. The investment and the trust that you've placed in BSL in doing the work enabled this to happen. So we really sincerely thank you for allowing us to be part of your lives through this project. We really also want to acknowledge all of the researchers who've contributed to the study. I know that many of you are here today. I'd like to make special mention of Janet Taylor, who was a researcher on the study for over 20 years and who has stuck with the study and is still a member of the advisory committee over this time. Thanks also to Dina, to Ursula Harrison, who are the two co-authors of the latest report. And I've, at a distance, experienced with Dina the challenge of bringing 34 years of research and all of these reports and work together. And really, they've both done a phenomenal job, and I hope that you feel like it's really been true to the depth of that work and research. And thanks particular to Ursula, who was the most recent researcher who's been working solely on life chances since 2019. I mentioned the advisory group before, so we've been guided through this study by an advisory group whose members have included Joe Baevsky, who's also generously supported the study through the foundation and has been a volunteer interviewer, Tim Gilly, Alex Fraser, Farah Farouk and Joseph Bolagden from our Social Policy and Research Centre, among others. So thank you to the advisory group members. And thanks also, of course, to the generous donors and the various Victorian government bodies who over the years have supported the study. The most recent stages of the study have been generously supported by the Prue Meyer Fund and the Bokhara Foundation. So thank you very much to them. Just as we end, and coming back to where I began, to mention a reflection in terms of longitudinal studies, and it's really timely for us. We've been through a process of thinking about the end of this and the value of longitudinal research, and we have seen and heard, and hopefully you've all experienced, it illuminates people's lives, it illuminates challenges over the course of a life in a way that a snapshot in time can't do alone. So it's significant and important to show those challenges over time and to show the impact of policies and different policies from different governments over time. So Janet Taylor wrote a 2014 book, Life Chances, Stories of Growing Up in Australia. And she said in that book that participant stories point to the persistence of inequality and the role of economic resources in providing opportunities and shaping life chances. They also illustrate the considerable resilience of the families and individuals and the importance of the support that they've been able to receive from our framework of social and community service. They show that life is complicated and that it is important to recognise the interplay of social, economic and individual factors. So we know that no one single policy or program can tackle this complexity, but we know that we need political will to invest in economic security and opportunity, and that will go a long way to address disadvantage. So, thanks everybody. I'd like to invite anyone who's been part of the study, the participants and researchers, to come up to the front because we want to take a photo of all of you together. Thanks everyone.